Hello, welcome to this presentation on how SAP PowerDesigner will help you with your joined-up thinking in business transformation. I'm going to cover a number of topics such as 6 simple questions you need to be able to provide the answers to, forming a framework for enterprise architecture. I'll talk about how PowerDesigner supports enterprise knowledge and enterprise governance, and how it provides the essential impact analysis so you know what's going to happen when you change something. Then I'll show you some real-world examples of PowerDesigner in use. My name is George McGeechy from Metadata Matters Limited, and I'm here today courtesy of SAP and Cromver. First of all, let's start with the definition. Business transformation is any radical organization change. By radical, something that will, trying to avoid synonyms here, will change the way you run your business considerably, such as when you merge your organization with another organization or you acquire them, when you decide to outsource business processes. So you want another organization to do some of your job for you. As well as the contractual obligations, you've got changes in organizations and the way processes work and the way services hand off to each other. If you want to introduce shared service centers, then obviously that can be quite radical. If you are introducing enterprise software like that offered by SAP, that could be a considerable change, could be one of the biggest shake-ups your organization ever has. Even after you've implemented it, if you're like some large organizations, you may have several instances of SAP, some of them supposedly doing the same thing. So you might want to merge existing enterprise software instances into a single one. That's going to be pretty radical. If you want to be more sustainable, that can be radical. As for example, when BP decided to start manufacturing solar panels. It's quite a change from oil and gas. It's still energy, but it's not oil and it's not gas. With business process re-engineering, you focus on business processes. That is your complete focus. With business transformation, you need a more holistic approach. You need to consider a lot of different things. But of course, we know that mergers and acquisitions, they always achieve their objectives. When we outsource business processes, everybody understands the scope and responsibilities and the data that's being managed by them on our behalf, of course. And nobody's ever surprised by the data their outsourcing partners send them. And of course, when something goes wrong or doesn't quite go to plan, nobody ever refuses to accept responsibility. They always put their hands up and say, it was us. Partly your unclear requirements, but it was us. No. And when you get new software, it always works perfectly from day one. Well, let's skip the fictional world and let's start talking about, well, what it is that you might want to transform in one of these big business transformation projects. You may have new goals. Going back to BP and the move into producing solar panels, they obviously had a goal that said they needed to move away from a reliance on fossil fuels in order to make their business sustainable. And I know 15 years ago that they were producing, they presumably still are, an annual sustainability report. You're likely to be transforming data. If you're implementing SAP Business Suite, that does allow you to handle data in a number of different ways, but there are limits. If you've got something really obscure, you might not want to change Business Suite. You might want to change your own data. Technology, of course, Internet of Things, cloud, various things. If you want if you're bringing in enterprise software, that might run in the cloud, it might run on your own hardware. But whatever it is, there's a technology transformation as well. And you're likely to change your organization structure and the people and the roles. And potentially business processes, because the chances are if you're doing a big transformation, your processes are going to change. And you might change your geography. You might move into different markets, for example. SAP have a business transformation methodology, which they refer to as BTM2. There's a link at the bottom of the page. And that has a number of phases. In the envision phase, we're looking at the big picture. We're assessing our current maturity and perhaps looking at where we want to go from now. And that involves the people at the top generally. The next one is engage, where we get detailed impressions of the as-is situation, where we want to go, and possibly several intermediate places, how we're going to get there through the roadmap, and then the governance is how we're going to actually manage all that. And then the transform phase is where we're actually implementing the to-be state, possibly in phases. Of course, once it's implemented, that's not the end of the world. That's not the end of the program. We have to optimize. We're continuously monitoring and improving what we've got. The key thing I think here with this methodology is that all our disciplines in the business, from risk management and executives right down to people on the storefront, shop floor, factory floor, drivers, cabs, wherever they are, have to work together. We need to make sure we set the correct course. We have the right strategy, the right values, and we implement risk management. And we have to enable the transformation, which involves an IT transformation team probably, program management, project management, change management, process management, competency management. I mean competent at saying competency. And it's pretty important to say now that all of these 4 phases in the BTM2 methodology are supported by SAP PowerDesigner. Now, during this presentation, I'm not going to talk about the roles of people in business transformation, nor am I going to talk about organisation structures, how you recruit people, what to put on your own CV afterwards, how long it takes, how much it costs, or even which integration partners to avoid. I am going to talk about how you capture, verify, share, and use all the things you need to know about your business transformation. I am going to talk about the answers to 6 simple questions about your organisation. You could probably guess what these questions are. These are really fundamental. They are what, how, where, who, when, and why. You have to ask all those questions about your organisation in order to understand it. And the answers to all those questions will tell us where we think we are today. Then you do some investigation and you discover where you actually are today. And we also think about where we intend to be tomorrow. So that is, going back to the terminology before, the as-is and the to-be situations. So here are some examples. By what, we're talking about the concepts we manage and the data we're moving around. Common concepts across most businesses will be customer, some kind of location, and something about staff. Then there will be your products. How do we do things? Well, we do it by defining and following business processes. Well, sometimes we just follow them, they're not defined. And we have software applications. That's how we do something. Where we do it, which locations, some physical locations, various sites that we have, networks, possibly a cloud provider like Amazon. Who does what? Organisation structure and roles. Various different ways of organising yourself in order to do a particular job. When do we do this? And this is all about choreographing everything. What triggers something happening? What do you do next? What service then gets triggered? And why? That's where we're talking about our strategic vision, the goals and the capabilities. So how do you capture, verify and share all this information? In many businesses, it's done with a complex web of Word and Excel files PowerPoint, Visio, possibly a few other things, but a whole load of independent documents. And they might link to each other, so you can have hyperlinks in Word and Excel that point to other documents, and you can quite nicely link things together, but they're very easy to break. They're very easy to go wrong. How do you manage these things? Well, you might do it in a version-controlled SharePoint site, which is managed by heroes and is owned by royalty. The heroes are the people who spend all weekend doing this work. It's quite drudge work, really. And the royalty are those who say, this document is mine, so you get your own. I refer to this as death by spreadsheet. And you can see here the analogy that it doesn't take much for all of this to get trashed and become useless, disjointed. All you have to do is take out one of those. There's a spreadsheet there on the right that is linked to so many other spreadsheets. If something goes wrong with that, or you start using the wrong version, it can be catastrophic. Well, let's say you do have comprehensive as-is documentation, but it gets updated once a year. It's only documentation. Nobody actually uses it to facilitate or drive change. It just hopefully tells us what we do. Oh, and by the way, we've actually got copies of this on at least 3 different SharePoint sites. 3 copies. Nobody knows which copy to rely on, since the enterprise architect who wrote a particular document has retired. And it's very difficult to tell which of those is reliable. You get the same thing described in different documents. Which one do I rely on? Oh, our enterprise architect. He's gone. There are inconsistencies. For example, we've got wealth management described in 3 different documents. And they're all different. Wealth management does this. We have 6 different Visio diagrams showing the business processes for wealth management. Or if we look at the actual software application, we call it 3 different names. We call it Prosper because that was the secret squirrel project that set it up. Or we call it wealth management because that's what it does for us. It provides wealth management. Or if you're on the IT side, you might call it WeMangor. It's the WeMangor system because that's the name of the database. And every system I've worked on is known by the name of the database within IT. But there's more than one application called wealth management. There are 4. There's one we built, another one we bought because we bought a company, then we bought a package, and the business intelligence team built a reporting system called wealth management. So when we're talking about the wealth management system, which one of those 4 are we talking about? It comes down to understanding your enterprise architecture. Now the 3 diagrams here show architecture, 3 completely different buildings from different times, meeting different requirements and different levels of complexity and different goals. Now many years ago, John Zachman, when he worked at IBM, he created a framework for enterprise architecture. He combined those 6 questions with the instantiation, the definitions of the things that the answers to the questions, and he formed an ontology which helps us categorize the things we know and who needs to know them. And it's called the Zachman Enterprise Architecture Framework. And here it is in a nutshell. We've got a column for each of our 6 questions and a column here for audience. And the reason there's a column here for audience is because the answers to those questions, if we start with executives, they get more abstract, less precise, less concrete answers to those questions because they don't need the detailed, concrete answers to absolutely everything in order to make executive decisions. However, people on the operational level, the actual users of the system, need to know everything. They need to have access to all that information in very great detail. And the level of concreteness, if you like, increases as you move down those layers from executives to business management to the architects who design the actual, what we're actually going to do and how we're going to do it, etc., to those who build it and those who use it. The answer in our what column, those are all questions. The questions there, the answers are all about our data. The how column is our process. Where is location? Who is responsibility? And the when was, as I said before, the process choreography. And the why is the stuff that executives do best. And we can see here, if I superimpose the BTM2 phases on top of this diagram, broadly speaking, the further down you go through the phases, the lower down you go in this matrix. And it's a key to remember here that whichever of these levels and question we're looking at, we could be looking at what from the point of view executive with a definition of customer. And we can be looking at a process, a very high level process, say, well, how do we acquire customers? And then we can be looking at, well, where do we acquire customers? And what database do we put this information on? Who's providing the service for us? All these things are linked together. There are many connections between the things that you would record on this matrix. And what we really need is impact analysis. If an executive makes a decision about a new goal or changing a goal, what is affected? So we can't do our business transformation without enterprise knowledge and enterprise governance. And what I'm going to show you in the rest of this session is how PowerDesigner enables knowledge and governance. I'm going to look at it from 6 perspectives. First of all, I'm going to look at the business view, then the process view, the data view, technology, how we link it all together, and then why you should be using PowerDesigner for this. So from the business view, here I'm looking at your mission, your objectives, your strategy, requirements you provide at various different levels, sometimes from externally, you might be talking about external regulators, the business capabilities that you want to have, the services your business needs to be able to provide to itself and within itself, the organization structure, and the projects. So for example, here we've got some corporate IT goals defined in PowerDesigner, and you can see the nesting of symbols in there shows us that we have goals within goals within goals. The box in the middle, the blue one for those watching in color, is a program of projects. So this one is the IT database realignment program, which delivers simplified data management. We're showing this graphically, but the underlying within the information within PowerDesigner, there is a link between those two that you can query. Now, if we look at the bottom right-hand goal, refactor internal code as basis for shared services, it's very useful to know, well, how are we achieving that goal? Well, we're actually achieving it because we have 5 projects ongoing, and they're all possibly parts of different programs, so they're helping us achieve that goal, and we have a measure of our feel for how much of that goal will be achieved by each project. So if the project extant for some reason gets cancelled, then 30% of that goal will not be realized. Now we move on to defining the organization structure. I'm not suggesting PowerDesigner would be the place where you manage your organization structure, but if you want to know which organization unit is responsible for various things, you need to define them in PowerDesigner. So I would suggest that you import them from the tool in which you manage them. And here we can see a simple example of an organization structure. We would need to define our business capabilities. So what are our core capabilities? We need to do supply chain planning, which includes the maintenance and strategy. We need to do research and development, quality and management. There are quite a few things else we might need to do. We have to describe how these business capabilities are realized by business processes. This is still high-level stuff. We're at the top level of the matrix. In this one here, I can see that enterprise planning is carried out in Europe, and we do long-range and medium-range planning perhaps in this organisation short-range planning is not viewed as enterprise. And there's one process we've got defined there called define and track strategy. There are no doubt a few others, but I can also see that this one breaks down into 3 sub-processes: managing corporate strategy, processes and risks. And these are going to be very high-level definitions. If we stick to the high level, I can see on this diagram that we've got either side of this image here, we have customer and supplier. These are roles. These are external roles in this example, but they play an important part in our organisation. And we can see the interactions these roles have with, in this case, different sites. It might be, we might actually show this as roles interacting with business capabilities instead of sites, but this diagram shows sites. So for example, that a customer requests a product and we're saying that headquarters is handling it. Headquarters are sending a proposal back to the customer, they receive the order, they invoice and they get the payment. But it's the 2 manufacturing sites who will actually produce things because they've been told to. And the manufacturing sites are responsible for shipping to the customer. And of course, central purchasing, I'm there to make sure we've got all the right materials and that we get the right prices from suppliers. And this is a good illustration of, there's a lot of information on this simple diagram. Of course, while we're managing projects, we need to know how we're spending money. On the PowerDesigner web portal, we can show these charts that we've got from our enterprise architecture modeling. In this particular example, we have IT capital expenditure, and we've linked projects that we're spending money on and hardware, etc., where we're spending money, to our individual goals. The red one, bottom left here, this one here, it actually is the refactor internal code as basis for shared services goal on an earlier diagram. And we can see that's going to cost us a lot of money in IT. And the majority of the budget will be in IT. Another kind of analysis we might want to do is knowing which database vendors we depend on. So here we're looking at the fact we've got in China SAP databases and some Oracle and some Apache Hadoop, but the SAP database is the principal one. Whereas in the Americas and New York is Oracle. And again, in Swindon in the UK it's Oracle. The size of the square, the rectangle, tells us relatively how much we're spending on it. And in the definition of the chart, we decide what is our actual measure. It might be the amount of data, how many terabytes of data we've got in each database. That might be our measure, but this is going to be something else, I would guess, on this chart. We may need to look at external requirements, and here we've got an enterprise architecture model, a PowerDesigner requirements model, which is showing some of the categories from professional petroleum data management. I've seen a bank in the UK use this to import and manage the BCBS 239 principles. And they were then able to either generate something elsewhere in PowerDesign to represent one of the principles, or just link something they've created, perhaps the definition of a transaction or a counterparty will link back to one of the principles, or a process relating to counterparties, possibly. Now to look at the process view. We're talking about high-level process maps, which we've seen before, more detailed process definitions, use cases, and really detailed business process automation capabilities. Here in our enterprise architecture model, we've got process maps, and we have them within areas and within capabilities. So, for example, within operation processes, the area of operation processes, we have a direct sales capability, which has three broad processes. We send to manufacturing, we validate the order, we register orders. There are no doubt others. This is quite simplified. This is very high level. We can describe business processes in detail if we choose to. This one is a BPMN, Business Process Management Notation diagram, which shows, with this and the decomposition diagrams beneath it, shows a process in a very great level of detail. In this case, enough detail to actually to send the information to a process automation tool like those offered by SAP, so that you implement the process you've defined in here. Here's another example of an executable process flow where we're showing how different SAP software hands off to each other. This one is been illustrated in the PowerDesigner web interface. When designing systems, we talk to users, we talk about what broad requirements they're going to want to have. How do you want to do something? Well, we'll say we want our customers in this example to be able to register on the website, and once they're registered, we want them to be able to consult academic papers online. Well, first thing to recognize is that a customer is a user, specific category of user. We then describe how they register, and then we have to describe how they're going to consult papers online. And the first thing they're going to have to do is log on. So we define how you log on just once and make it form part of this use case called consult papers online. Then we describe the activities you go through when fulfilling this use case. So this is what we want the system, manual or automated, to actually do for us. In some tools, you define use cases just as text. It's almost like a Word document or a procedure document. In PowerDesigner, you can do that if you want, but you can also have an activity flow in it so that actually we can define the individual steps you take and visualize the logic. And finally, process and data work in tandem. You can't name processes, you can't name use cases, you actually can't describe your objectives until you agree your terminology, the concepts. So for example, here's a university example. Until you agree the meaning of the term student, you can't agree this business objective to raise student graduation rates by a certain amount. Unless you agree student, you can't measure it. And unless you agree graduation, you can't measure it. You can't properly define what's involved with enrolling a student if you can't agree what a student is. Because if student, what one person thinks of as student to somebody else is 2 or 3 other things as well as student, there might be 4 processes instead of 1. The use case, go back to that. The use case might be registrar enrolls student. But until you agree what student is, you don't know quite what you need to do there. And a business service you might provide called enroll student. And I need to thank Alex Sharp from Claritech Consulting for putting this thought in my head, or reminding me when I was reading one of his old presentations. Now that leads us on to data, where we're looking at the terminology the business uses, the concepts we need to understand and manage. Then we talk about a more detailed logical view of that data, and then designing the physical containers for storing the data and for passing the data around the organisation or into and out of the organisation. And the data mappings, where we actually saying, well, we have this container of data over here which contains data that was originally put in somewhere else, and we need to map the two together. And sometimes those mappings can be used, as we'll see later on, for actually helping us construct our IT. Here we have an example of a glossary which we use to agree and share terminology, and can be used also for helping us make sure that the objects we create within PowerDesigner follow our naming standards. Here we have in our oil and gas business glossary some very specific terms like a well spud date, which to understand that, you have to understand what spudding in means. And spudding in is what they do when they're drilling for oil and gas. They're drilling a new well. First of all, they actually have to drill a slightly wider hole and line it, and then drill the actual well in the middle of it with a smaller drill bit. And that's called spudding in. And that's an important piece of data. You can see here that we've also got, under customer in the party subject area, we've got synonyms. And it's very important to know that customer is the term we want to use, but people may use the words client and consumer instead. This glossary is not just a static thing sitting here. It can be used, as I said, for managing the naming conventions of the things you create in your models. It's also quite a useful artifact for impact analysis. As well as the terminology, we need to agree the concepts that matter. If you remember back to my student example, in that example, university needs to define what student means. Student, in their case, is probably synonymous with customer. In this example here, we've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 separate concepts here. And we can see the way I've organised this is that the 4 in the middle are where the real value comes from within the organisation. But we can't succeed without the rest. And we've got some very broad illustrations here of the links between them. No doubt there are others, but this is a very high level view for those that are really of interest to people who look at the business at this level. The next thing that we have to do is take, for example, customer and expand on the definition. And so, well, actually, what information do we need to know about customers? We need to know about perhaps the customer themselves, the addresses they have, the invoices we raise against the accounts they have, possibly links to employees. We may show this, as in the diagram in the middle, at a very high level with just boxes and lines. We will eventually start saying, well, what do we know about a customer? How do we identify a customer? What properties do we have about addresses? What do we have on invoices? We will gradually work down to a fully described view of customer data that might look something like this. This now contains all the information we need to know about an order or about a customer or about an address, and tells us how they're all related. And from this, we can decide we can either map this to where that information exists if we've bought a load of packages to help us understand what the systems are doing for us, or we can use this to build our own. So, for example, this is showing the structure of part of a database that has customer information in it. And the text on the right is the script that PowerDesigner could generate for you to run in, say, Oracle and create a database table for you. Very technical stuff, almost right down at the bottom of the what column in the matrix. Well, we've defined our data, we've built our databases, and we want it to go into our data warehouse. This is a PowerDesigner data movement model. We're showing on the left here, we have finance, sales, and shipment databases. And there's a process that reads those in and loads it into the enterprise warehouse in the middle. Then there's another process that runs and takes that data into data marts. This is quite a nice high-level architectural view of it. And later on we'll see a more detailed view. And there are a couple of different ways in PowerDesigner for recording what you're doing here and documenting it. But one key thing to bear in mind here is that for some technologies, PowerDesigner is able to actually, once you've described it in here, update your tool to actually do this for you. Here's another example of what we can actually build. This is a model representing JSON is a relatively new standard for defining messages that carry data around. They have a hierarchical structure to them. And here is a model showing in the PowerDesigner web front end, showing the structure of one of these schemas. So you could bring one in that you actually have to follow. Maybe it's this some kind of messaging standard that you have to use, or even a regulatory requirement that your returns must be in this format. Here we can model this format and we can say where each of these pieces of data is going to come from. Let's move on to the technology view, and here we're talking about the infrastructure, the networks, etc., the hardware we've got, the software we've got, keeping records of that, and mapping that to the things we've seen before, the business objects, the business view, the process view, and the data view. In this application architecture diagram, we can see the boxes which represent systems, and inside each one is a software application and a database. And in between those systems we have ETL jobs. Here's an example of a matrix, a dependency matrix. PowerDesigner allows you to effectively draw a matrix of showing the connections from almost anything to almost anything else. If it makes sense to you, you can show the connections in a matrix, and depending on what the connections are, you can sometimes create, edit, remove those dependencies using the matrix. But here we're showing in the rows the business capabilities, and in the columns we have the IT systems that these capabilities depend on. Now I'm going to talk about linking it all together. You can imagine, and I've shown you some examples, that these various artifacts we're creating are all linked together. And the key thing in PowerDesigner, there are a number of ways of showing those connections. And generally speaking, when you connect two things together in PowerDesigner, it doesn't matter which one of those two you're looking at, it always allows you to see that connection. And some modeling tools actually, certainly on the data modeling front, you can define a connection at one end and the object at the other end has no visibility of it, which makes impact analysis very difficult. In PowerDesigner, we don't have that difficulty. A core benefit of using PowerDesigner is this ability to do impact assessment. So for example, here on PowerDesigner Web, I have my role of supplier you saw on that earlier diagram. I can see that it's linked through to central purchasing, which is linked to manufacturing, and that's linked to the shipping capability. And there are other connections here that are grayed out because I've chosen to focus on one particular one. The tool allows you to define your own rules for showing the impact and the lineage. The impact are the things on the right, and the lineage is the things on the left, basically what might have come before the thing in the middle. We can define our own rules, and this one was done during the default rules that come out of the box. You can also take a different view of it. Here I've got a business capability. This is the impact analysis running in the tool that runs in Windows, and I can see that it's linked to an area, so it's part of management. It's linked to the Europe site. There are a couple of roles involved. There's Amy Allen, who's plays a role, and we can see who her manager is, and we can see that Amy Allen is based in London. The role player might not be a person, it might be a role instead. We can see we've got a couple of links here to projects, and we can also see that it has some dependent processes. So we've got define and track strategy, which has a number of sub-processes, and that process is linked to Amy Allen, Axel Dench, and Bai Ling. And this is an active impact analysis. If I change this and rerun the impact analysis, this will change. I can also create, I haven't got an example of that, but I can also create a diagram showing these connections and have that and store that and have it refreshed. An important kind of impact analysis we need to have is data lineage. So, for example, if you know that you've got a figure in one of your reports that is 50% higher than it's ever been and you're wondering why, you need to know where that data comes from. And here on the upper image shows how we defined where the data came from, showing that data goes from the customer table in our enterprise warehouse to the customer table in our sales mart, and we can see which pieces of data go where. In the PowerDesigner web, I can see, this is from a slightly different area in the same model, we have a customized dimension that we're using in our reporting, and we can see where the data came from, and we can also see where it's going, where it came from on the left and where it's going on the right. Okay, why would you use PowerDesigner to do all this? I'm going to say this again, it supports all those transformation phases in the BTM2 methodology. It gives us impact and lineage analysis, and we can define our own rules for analysing it. And it's not a static documentation tool. You can automate it, make it do things for you. You can actually get it to create things for you as part of your IT, or create business artifacts for you. We can extend what the tool does out of the box really easily and customize it so that your instance, that the way you use PowerDesign isn't the same as other people. And what we need to do is avoid death by spreadsheet. We have to stop relying on heroes, and we don't want to let royalty slow us down. There is this expression of data mining being clasping your data to your chest and saying, this data is mine. We do not want royalty to slow you down by saying you can't have access to these specifications because they're mine. Again, the 4 phases of the BTM2 methodology, they're all supported by PowerDesigner. Here's an example of how one organisation chose their tools. This is a bank I went to see a few years ago. They have 3 tools, all chosen for particular uses, meeting specific needs for a specific part of the bank. They have a data modelling tool, which is useful for architects, engineers and technicians, but only understands data. They have a process modelling tool that runs in the cloud and is very good at doing process models, but the process modelling tool did not know what data was. It has inputs and outputs and no recognition of data. And they bought an enterprise architecture tool which covered a wide breadth but only the very top layers. And there was no way of moving information between these tools to make sure they're consistent and enabling joined up thinking. No way at all. And it hadn't even occurred to them that they would need to do that. It's not a static documentation tool. We can do automation. We can validate everything that you define against a set of rules. You can understand and change the way things happen in your business with databases, business objects and other reporting tools, SAP Business Suite, etc. with bi-directional links, allowing you to go and grab an understanding from that tool of what it does for you. And then tell it to change. We can extend it to add information that SAP haven't given you a home for. You can easily add it. You can add your own validation rules. We can customize it. We can change the way PowerDesigner works, change the way it looks, hide things, simplify it if necessary, add completely new features, such as integrating with tools that SAP don't support. And we can save time and money by automating various things. For example, the design process for your data warehouse, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. The key thing is here, don't change your architecture practices to fit the tool. Change the tool instead. Here's an example. A European railway company transforming their business. First thing they needed to do was understand their as-is enterprise architecture. They did that. Then they were talking about buying a software solution for sales and marketing. So they used PowerDesigner to describe their requirements. What processes does it need to contain? How do those processes work? What core capabilities are there? And hopefully something as simple as a definition of what we mean by campaign, as opposed to maybe what they mean by campaign, or even what we mean by product, as opposed to what they mean by product. When I worked at National years ago, we had a definition of product. And when we outsourced some of our secured lending, the outsourcer had a completely different definition of product. Where we might have 20 products, they had 200 or 300. The next thing that this railway company did was describe detail or the to-be situation for their sales and marketing business processes prior to selecting a solution. Then they implemented the sales and marketing solution, so they updated their enterprise architecture, because you never get exactly what you want. There are always compromises. Here's a couple more examples. Information architecture, the financial industry business ontology is available in PowerDesigner now. It's a very large model, and I know a lot of banks have downloaded it. In regulatory compliance, there's a bank in the UK that used the requirements model I showed you before and various models dependent on it to show how they've complied with BCBS 239. Now I'd like to almost finish with the example of automating the design and build for your data warehouse or data lake. A successful data warehouse allows you to access and analyze information reliably and timely. And it helps a lot if when you're given information, it matches your understanding of the business and how it operates. It uses the right terminology, for example. And I think the key to this is recognizing and describing the concepts that are of interest to the business. If you're in insurance, make sure you agree the definition of a claim. When is something not a claim? Is it a request, or is it a question and not a claim? So we want, if we're going to say how many claims have we resolved this month, if we can't agree what a claim is, then we won't agree on a figure. The data warehouse has to use the same terminology as the business does. And the key thing is that those business needs, sometimes the terminology changes, but most likely it's the terminology is staying the same, but we've now got extra data perhaps about campaigns, or the process is slightly different, so information comes through from different places in different ways, in different timing, and the data warehouse needs to change and has to respond rapidly. They're complex databases, and they have potentially unpredictable analysis needs, and they have to react to change quickly without compromising your existing analysis. So what's that got to do with PowerDesigner? Well, automating the creation and amendment of data warehouse structures is critical to achieving those objectives. So here's an example. There's a relatively new methodology. When I say new, I think it was first publicized in 2003. It's a methodology called Data Vault. It's designed to facilitate flexibility, maintainability, and scalability of data warehouses. So here's an example. We've got our three source systems, finance, sales, and shipment databases, and we can load the staging data into a staging database or staging tables. This might all be one database with different clumps of tables in. We take that staging, so that just the data we got from the source systems. And then you have to load it into a place called the raw vault, which takes that raw data that's come from your source systems and structures it following the data vault rules. And then we have a business vault that reorganizes that data so it matches your terminology. So all the campaign information that came from different places is combined into one concept of campaign with some dependent information off it. And there's another load process for that. And this is the core thing that drives the marts. So there's another transformation process that we use to send data out to our data marts, and eventually you get business intelligence dashboard and reports. Now, PowerDesigner can be used to automatically build. I know several organizations that have done this. They can automatically build the database designs and the code to move data between the databases, and if you're using business objects, we can develop the business objects universe for you, all from within this one tool. That when you change the data in your, say, your finance database, we can actually automate the changes that going through to your data vault and right through to your data marts. It can be quite complex. It's not something you would do at the drop of a hat, but the tool can automate it for you and save you a lot of time and money and make things more flexible. Earlier this year, I was talking to a key provider of offshore oil and gas infrastructure, and when COVID-19 came along, they had a real information management problem. They urgently needed information about staff because they operate vessels for laying pipelines, various things like that. So they needed to know where all their staff were, which city in which country, which facility were they in, were they on a vessel, where is it, where do they need to be next, when do they need to be there, where are they allowed to go. So how do we get them, knowing all that information, how do we get them from where they are now to where they need to be on time? For example, we've got a vessel in the North Sea. It's about to have a crew change. So we need a new crew there as soon as possible. One of the engineers due to join that vessel is Brazilian, currently in a city in Italy. At that time, the city in Italy was about to be locked down. So do we actually get that person out of that city, or do we leave them there? If we get them out of the city, where do they go next? They need to go to the North Sea. They're Brazilian. Are they even allowed to leave Italy? Are they allowed to go to France or the UK? Or the Netherlands or Norway? How can we get them from where they are now to where they need to be? And there's a case here of an American engineer currently in Bahrain, needs to go home to Hawaii. How are they going to get there? This was, as you can understand, very urgent. So using PowerDesigner, they were able to provide the required analysis capabilities very quickly. They define a logical data model describing the information required, partly based on personal knowledge, and by looking at the databases that currently hold the data and say, oh yeah, we need that, and that. Then we described the database that would hold all this information and pull it together, built it, and then used Power BI to do the reporting. And they did all this very quickly. Now, I would like to thank you for your attention. If you want to discuss PowerDesigner licensing options, please call Cromver to discuss your requirements. Ask for Mike Evans. I'm George McGeechy. Here are my contact details. On Twitter, I'm Metadata Junkie, and I'd love to hear from you.